Amanda Sullivan knelt in the snow, her gloved fingers tracing the edge of a footprint that shouldn't exist. The depression in the crystalline surface measured nearly 18 inches from heel to toe, far too large for any human. But what made her breath catch in her throat wasn't the size. It was the way the print seemed to shift as she examined it, the ridges and contours appearing to reconfigure themselves in her peripheral vision, as if the snow itself was struggling to remember what shape had pressed into it. She'd been a ranger in the Superior National Forest for 11 years, long enough to know every predator track, every snow formation, every optical illusion these woods could conjure. This was none of those things. The thermometer clipped to her pack read, -8 degrees Fahrenheit, but Amanda felt colder than the mercury suggested. It was the kind of cold that seemed to originate from inside her chest and radiate outward, meeting the December air in an uncomfortable synchronicity. She recognized the sensation, had felt it before, 6 years ago, when she'd found what remained of her partner, David Kowalski, scattered across a ravine after he'd missed an anchor point during a technical rescue. The cold of that day had never quite left her, living somewhere between her ribs like a malignant thing. The footprint led northeast, deeper into the Boundary Waters wilderness, toward the area where Brittany Spencer had been conducting her solo patrol 72 hours ago. Amanda stood, her knees protesting the movement. She was 38 now, not the fresh-faced recruit who'd believed she could save everyone. Her dark hair, pulled back in a tight braid, showed threads of premature gray at the temples. The scar above her left eyebrow, courtesy of a panicked elk, had faded to a thin white line that became more prominent when she was tired or stressed. Right now, it felt like it was glowing. She keyed the radio on her shoulder. Sullivan to base. I'm at the coordinates where Spencer's last GPS ping originated. Found tracks, proceeding northeast on what appears to be her trail. Static answered her. Not unusual. The Boundary Waters region was notorious for dead zones, especially in winter when atmospheric conditions played havoc with radio waves. Her Garmin GPS unit showed 5 bars at least. Small comfort. Amanda had known Brittany Spencer for only 3 months. The younger ranger had transferred from Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, eager for a challenge, she'd said. 26 years old, compact and efficient, with the kind of earnest enthusiasm that Amanda had lost somewhere along the way. Brittany had asked her about the Boundary Waters history during their first patrol together, scribbling notes in a worn moleskin notebook she kept in her breast pocket. The Ojibwe have stories about these woods, Brittany had said, her breath misting in the October air, about things that hunt here, spirits that take on the worst aspects of winter itself. Amanda had dismissed it as the romantic fascination of someone new to the region. Now, staring at the impossible footprint, she wondered if dismissal had been premature. The tracks continued in a surprisingly straight line through the pine forest, weaving between the skeletal birch trees with their papery white bark. Every 30 feet or so, Amanda found another print, but they weren't consistent. Some measured 18 inches. Others were barely larger than her own size 8 boots. In one location, she found a cluster of prints that seemed to spiral around a massive white pine, increasing in size with each revolution, as if whatever made them was growing as it circled. Her mouth tasted of copper and old fear. The forest here felt wrong. Amanda had developed an instinct over the years for recognizing when an ecosystem was in balance versus when something had disrupted the natural order. The Boundary Waters in winter was supposed to be quiet, not silent but muted, with the occasional call of a raven or the crack of ice on one of the 1,000 lakes. This was different. This was the absence of sound, as if every living thing had abandoned this particular stretch of woods. She found Brittany's first campsite just before noon. The tent was still standing, which was odd. If Brittany had left voluntarily, she would have packed it. If she'd been attacked by a bear or wolves, unlikely in December but not impossible, the tent would show damage. Instead, it stood pristine in a small clearing, the fly pulled taut, the stakes driven deep into the frozen ground. Amanda approached cautiously, calling out, "Brittany, it's Sullivan. If you're hurt, I'm here to help." Nothing. The tent's zipper was pulled tight. Amanda crouched beside it, noting the disturbed snow around the entrance. More of those impossible tracks, these ones smaller, more human-sized. She worked the zipper with numb fingers. The interior was chaos. Brittany's sleeping bag had been shredded, the synthetic fill scattered across the tent floor like snow. Her supplies, a camp stove, water bottles, MREs, were scattered and crushed. The collapsible aluminum tent poles had been bent into impossible angles, the metal creased in ways that would require tremendous force. But it was the notebook that stopped Amanda cold. Brittany's moleskin lay open in the center of the tent, its pages covered in frantic handwriting that degraded from neat block letters to illegible scrawl. Amanda picked it up carefully, her headlamp illuminating the words. Day 1. Found the hiking party's abandoned campsite. 3 tents, supplies intact, but no sign of the hikers. GPS shows they were headed to Curtain Falls, following their trail. Day 2. The trail doesn't make sense. The tracks double back, cross over themselves, loop in circles. Found boot prints in the snow that appear and disappear. Weather clear, but temperature dropping faster than forecast predicted. Down to 15-degree farms. Radio won't connect to base. GPS working intermittently. Something followed me back to camp last night. Heard it circling. Couldn't see it. Too fast. Breathing pattern wrong. Too long between breaths, like minutes instead of seconds. The handwriting changed here, becoming more erratic. Day 3. Can't tell time anymore. Sun wrong. Shadows wrong. The tracks around my tent this morning were mine. My boots, my gait. But I never left the tent. I know I didn't. The trees are closer than yesterday. I measured the distance to the nearest pine, 73 feet. Now it's 45 feet. Trees don't move. Trees don't move. Trees don't move. The final entry was barely readable, pressed so hard into the paper that it had torn through in places. It knows my name. Says it with David's voice. Says it the way he said it when he was falling. I can hear the wind whistling past him in the words, but David is dead. David has been dead. How does it know about David? How does it know what dying sounds like in his throat? I need to go north. It wants me to go north. I don't want to go north. I'm going north. Amanda's hands shook, not from the cold. She photographed the pages with her digital camera, a chunky Canon from 2008 that still used SD cards. The flash seemed obscenely bright in the tent's confines. She tucked the notebook into her pack, along with what remained of Brittany's identification and radio. Outside, the tracks continued north. Amanda knew the terrain. North from here led deeper into the wilderness, toward a section of the boundary waters that most rangers avoided even in summer. The area had a reputation. Too many disappearances over the years. Most of them chalked up to exposure or falls or the 1,000 dangers that came with remote wilderness. But there were stories among the rangers, shared in low voices during the long winter nights at the station. Stories about the Bayfield Peninsula incident in 1997. About the Morrison family found frozen in their cabin despite a working wood stove. About the trapper who'd staggered out of the woods in 1954, weighing 60 pounds less than when he'd gone in, unable to stop eating even as his stomach ruptured. Wendigo. That was the Ojibwe word. Wendigo in the anglicized version that white settlers had adopted and mangled. An evil spirit of winter and starvation, a cannibal entity that was always hungry, always cold, always hunting. Amanda didn't believe in spirits. She believed in hypothermia and starvation-induced psychosis and the very human capacity for violence. But standing in the clearing with Brittany's destroyed campsite behind her, she found her certainty wavering. The radio crackled suddenly, making her jump. "Levin, Sullivan, do you—" She grabbed for it. "Base, this is Sullivan. I'm at Spencer's campsite. Tent is abandoned. Found her journal. She headed north toward—" Static swallowed her words. Then through the white noise she heard something that made her blood crystallize. Amanda. Her name, spoken in David Kowalski's voice. The same lilting Chicago accent. The same slight rasp from years of smoking Marlboros that he'd quit 3 years before he died. "Amanda, it's so cold where I am." She dropped the radio. It landed in the snow, still transmitting. You could have saved me, Amanda. Why didn't you check my anchor? You always checked. Why not that day? You're not real, Amanda whispered. David is dead. Dead but not gone. Not gone where I am. Where it's cold and hungry and the trees have eyes. She picked up the radio with shaking hands and turned it off. The silence that followed was worse than the voice. Get it together, Sullivan. Shock, stress, your mind playing tricks. Brittany wrote about this. It uses voices. It uses fear. But how did it know about David? That detail had never been in any report, never discussed with anyone. Only she knew that she'd been distracted that day, that she'd skipped her usual double check of his anchor setup because they'd been arguing about something stupid, what they were having for dinner of all things. Only she carried that particular guilt. Amanda forced herself to breathe, to think methodically. She had supplies for 3 days. She could follow Brittany's trail for another 4 hours, then set up camp and reassess in the morning. The smart move would be to head back, get a full SR team mobilized. But something in Brittany's journal entries suggested time was critical. The progression from rational to irrational had happened in just 3 days. If Brittany was still alive, and that was becoming a grimmer if by the hour, she might not have 3 days. The tracks led north. Amanda followed. The forest changed as she walked, subtle at first, the spacing of the trees, the angle of the shadows. Then more obvious. The pine trees gave way to birch groves that shouldn't exist at this elevation. The snow depth varied wildly, from ankle deep to waist deep within the span of a few feet, despite the uniform terrain. Her GPS started showing impossible readings, coordinates that would place her 2 miles east, then 3 miles west, then back at her starting point, even though she'd been walking in a straight line for an hour. She found Brittany's second campsite at 14:30 hours according to her watch. Though the light suggested either dawn or dusk, she couldn't tell which. This camp showed signs of a hasty departure. The tent was partially collapsed, gear scattered in a wide radius. Amanda found Brittany's ranger jacket caught on a low branch, its patches torn, the Forest Service logo shredded. And in the snow, written in what might have been a stick or might have been a finger, a single word repeated over and over in a spiral pattern. Hungry, 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 hungry. The letters were 3 feet tall. The spiral was 20 feet in diameter. Amanda calculated how long it would take to write that much text in frozen snow. Hours. It would take hours. She found more tracks. Human-sized now, barefoot, the toes spread unnaturally wide, and mixed among them, deer tracks. Dozens of them, all converging on a single point deeper in the forest. The wind picked up, carrying a sound that might have been screaming or might have been the creak of old ice. Amanda's headlamp flickered. The batteries were fresh. She'd changed them that morning. But the beam grew weaker, yellower, until she was moving through a tunnel of amber light in an ocean of darkness. She found the deer at 1600 hours. There were 11 of them, arranged in a perfect circle around a massive oak tree. Each deer had been opened from throat to belly, the incisions surgically precise. The organs were missing. The blood had crystallized in the extreme cold, creating frozen splatter patterns that defied physics, arcing upward instead of falling down, hanging in the air like crimson icicles. The deer were still alive. Amanda watched, unable to process what she was seeing as one of them blinked. Its chest rose and fell slowly. Breath misted from its nostrils. It should have been dead minutes after the first cut. Blood loss alone should have killed it. But here it was, its dark eye rolling to focus on her with an expression that might have been pleading. She raised her pistol, a Glock 22 that felt inadequate suddenly, and fired a mercy shot. The deer's head snapped back. The other 10 turned to look at her in perfect unison. Then they stood up. The opened bodies moved as if strings were pulling them, jerky and wrong. They didn't walk so much as pivot on their legs, rotating to face her fully. The wounds in their chests leaked nothing. The hanging blood icicles chimed against each other like wind chimes. Amanda ran, She crashed through the underbrush, her pack slamming against her spine, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her lungs. Behind her, she could hear the deer following. Not the thunder of hooves, but a wet dragging sound as if they were pulling themselves across the ground. The forest had become a maze. Trees appeared where there had been clear paths seconds before. The ground tilted at impossible angles. She fell, tasted blood, got up, kept running. She burst into a clearing and stopped. Brittany Spencer stood in the center of the space, or what had been Brittany Spencer. The younger ranger was skeletal, her uniform hanging off a frame that seemed to have lost 50 pounds in 3 days. Her skin was the color of old snow, stretched tight over bones that jutted at sharp angles. But she was smiling. That was the worst part. The smile was wide and genuine and completely wrong. "Amanda," Brittany said, and her voice was her own, but also something else, something older and hungrier. "I'm so glad you came. I've been waiting. It's been waiting. We're all waiting. Brittany, we need to get you out of here. You're hypothermic. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. For the first time, actually." Brittany took a step forward, and Amanda saw that her feet were bare, blackened with frostbite. "It showed me things, Amanda. Showed me what we really are. Just meat. Just hunger wearing a human shape. We pretend we're better than the animals, but we're not. We're worse. We know we're going to die, and we pretend we don't. We build houses and families and careers like they'll protect us from the cold. But the cold gets in eventually. The cold always gets in. That's the exposure talking, the hypothermia. Come on, we'll get you warm." "I am warm." Brittany's scream was inhuman, a sound that belonged in a slaughterhouse. "I'm warmer than I've ever been. It burns inside me. It burns, and I'm still so hungry." She lunged. Amanda fired 3 times, center mass the way she'd been trained. Brittany staggered but didn't fall. The holes in her uniform leaked something dark that steamed in the cold air. "You can't kill what's already been consumed," Brittany said, and her jaw unhinged like a snake's, opening far wider than should be possible. Inside her mouth, Amanda saw not teeth but ice, jagged crystalline formations that glittered in the dimming light. Amanda turned and ran again, back into the forest, Brittany's laughter following her like a physical thing. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in the snow, her lungs screaming for air that didn't seem to contain any oxygen. The world spun. Her headlamp had died completely. The only light came from the moon, full and impossibly large, close enough that she could see the craters in detail usually visible only through a telescope. The trees around her were wrong. She was certain of that now. They were too tall, their branches reaching down instead of up, their bark moving with what might have been breathing. And in the spaces between the trees, shadows that didn't align with any light source. "Hello, Amanda." David's voice again, but this time he was standing in front of her. Exactly as she remembered him. Curly red hair, freckled face, the gap between his front teeth that he'd always been self-conscious about. He wore the same blue jacket he'd been wearing the day he fell. "You're not real," she said, but the words came out as a sob. "Does it matter?" David crouched beside her, and she could smell his cologne. Polo blue, he'd worn it every day. "Real or not real, I'm here. And you're dying, Amanda. Hypothermia is setting in. Your core temperature has dropped below 95 degrees. In another hour, you won't be able to move. In 2 hours, your heart will stop. I have supplies. I can make a fire." "No, you can't. Look at your hands." She looked. Her gloves were gone. She didn't remember taking them off. Her fingers were white, then purple at the tips. Frostbite. Advanced frostbite. When had that happened? "You're going to die out here," David said gently. "Just like I did. Just like Brittany did. Just like everyone who comes here eventually does. The cold takes us all." "What are you?" The question came out as a whisper. David smiled, but it wasn't David's smile. It was too wide, too full of teeth. Names matter. The Ojibwe knew that. Names have power. But I've been called many things. Windigo, Wichtiko, Achin, the spirit of winter, the Wendigo. I am hunger that cannot be satisfied. I am cold that cannot be warmed. I am the truth beneath all your comfortable lies, that you are alone and afraid, and the universe doesn't care if you live or die. As he spoke, David's form began to change. Or maybe Amanda's perception was changing, her dying brain finally seeing what had been there all along. The human shape collapsed inward like a negative space, revealing something underneath. Something tall and thin, with limbs that bent in too many places. Antlers or branches sprouted from where a head should be. The smell of carrion and old ice filled the air. I offered Brittany a choice, and the thing said in a voice like cracking ice, I offer you the same. Surrender to me completely, become my vessel, hunt with me, feed with me, or die here in the snow, alone and forgotten. Amanda's thoughts moved sluggishly. She was cold, so cold, and hungry actually. When had she last eaten? She couldn't remember. The hunger was a living thing inside her, gnawing at her stomach, at her reason. It would be so easy to say yes, to stop fighting, to let the cold in all the way. She thought of David, the real David, not this thing wearing his face. She thought of the last thing he'd said to her, falling through space toward the rocks below. Not your fault. He'd known. Even in those final seconds, he'd known she would blame herself, and he'd tried to absolve her. She thought of Brittany, so eager and alive, writing in her notebook about the history of these woods. She thought of all the people the Wendigo had taken over the years, all the families left waiting, wondering. No, Amanda said. The Wendigo tilted its head, the antlers scraping against the sky. No? No, she said again, stronger now. I'm not yours. I'm not food. I'm not an empty thing for you to fill. The temperature dropped. Amanda's breath stopped misting because it was too cold even for that. The snow beneath her began to crack and split, revealing something underneath. Not earth, but more cold, an infinite well of it stretching down forever. Then you'll die, the Wendigo said simply. Maybe, Amanda said, but I'll die as me. She reached into her pack with numb fingers, finding the one item she'd brought on instinct, a small leather pouch her grandmother had given her years ago. Ojibwe, her grandmother had been, though she'd married white and moved away from the reservation. She'd told Amanda stories about the woods, about the old ways, about protection. Tobacco, her grandmother had said. Always carry tobacco, an offering, a sign of respect. Amanda's fingers closed on the pouch. She pulled it out, scattered the dried leaves in a circle around her. The Wendigo hissed, a sound like steam escaping from cracked ice. You think that will save you? No, Amanda said. But it's respect. It's acknowledgement. You're part of this place, part of the cycle. I respect that, but I won't feed you. The Wendigo stared at her with eyes that were not eyes, considering. Then it laughed, a sound like trees splitting in a deep freeze. You're brave, it said. Or stupid. They're often the same thing. Very well, Amanda Sullivan. You may go. This time. But I am always here. Always hungry. And next time you come to my woods, next time you're cold and alone and afraid, I will remember you. And I will ask again. It stepped backward into the shadows between the trees and was gone. The forest normalized around her, or maybe Amanda's perception normalized. Either way, she could suddenly see her headlamp working again, could see a trail marker she recognized, could see the GPS reading something sensible. She was 3 miles from the Western Ranger Station. It took her 4 hours to walk it. By the time she staggered into the station, both hands and feet were dangerously frostbitten. The rangers on duty rushed her inside, called for a medevac, wrapped her in warming blankets. Spencer? She asked through chattering teeth. The senior ranger, Tom Morrison, shook his head. No sign. We're mounting a full search at first light. They wouldn't find her. Amanda knew that. Brittany was part of the woods now, part of the cold. They life-flighted Amanda to Duluth. She lost 3 toes on her left foot and 2 fingers on her right hand to frostbite. The doctors called it a miracle she survived. Severe hypothermia, they said. Core temperature of 89 degrees when she arrived. Another hour, and she would have been dead. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital. During that time, search teams combed the area where she'd been found. They discovered no trace of Brittany Spencer, no abandoned campsites, no circles of mutilated deer. The forest had swallowed the evidence, or had never generated it in the first place. Amanda's camera had malfunctioned, they told her. The SD card was corrupted. No photos, no proof. Brittany's family held a memorial service. Amanda attended, standing in the back, unable to explain what had really happened. How could she? She barely believed it herself. Her psych evaluation before return to duty flagged her for extended leave. Trauma response, they called it. PTSD from the search, hallucinations brought on by hypothermia. Maybe they were right. Amanda returned to the Superior National Forest 3 months later, cleared for limited duty. She requested a transfer away from the Boundary Waters region. The request was granted. She worked the southern sections now, where the woods felt normal, where the cold was just cold. But sometimes on the clearest winter nights when the temperature dropped below zero, Amanda would step outside her cabin and look north. And she would hear it, faint and far away, but unmistakable, the sound of something moving through the trees, the sound of hunger that never stopped. She kept the tobacco pouch with her always, an offering, a sign of respect. And she never ever went north. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened to Brittany.
The Roosevelt elk population data made no sense. Lauren Mitchell had been staring at the spreadsheet for 20 minutes, cross-referencing GPS collar readings with her field observations from the past 6 weeks, and the numbers refused to reconcile with any ecological model she knew. 37 tagged animals, Roosevelt elk, black-tailed deer, even the resident black bears, had systematically avoided a 12-square-mile section of the Hoh rainforest since late September. Not gradually, as temperature or food availability might dictate, abruptly, as if someone had drawn an invisible perimeter, and every creature with functioning instincts had decided simultaneously that crossing it meant death. She rubbed her eyes beneath her wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of utilitarian frames that said she cared more about data than appearance. At 34, Lauren had built her career on rational explanations, on the measurable and provable. Wildlife biologist for Olympic National Park meant understanding animal behavior through the lens of science, migration patterns, predation pressure, habitat disruption. There was always a reason, always data to explain the inexplicable, except this. The corner of her temporary office, really just a converted storage room in the ranger station at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center, smelled like old paper and the perpetual dampness that characterized Washington's temperate rainforest. Outside, October rain drummed against the window with the persistence of a metronome. She'd grown accustomed to the sound over the past 3 years, the way it became white noise, almost comforting in its constancy. Today, it felt accusatory, each drop a reminder that she'd been sitting here analyzing data while Austin Crawford remained missing for 72 hours. Austin, 28 years old, barely a year into his ranger position, still carried that eager enthusiasm that most veterans shed after their first brutal winter season. She'd trained him herself, taught him to read topographic maps by feel, to identify Sitka spruce from Douglas fir by bark texture alone. He'd been meticulous about protocols, almost obsessively so, the kind of ranger who logged every detail in his field notebook with near calligraphic precision, which made his disappearance even more disturbing. The official search and rescue operation had been scaled back yesterday. Chief Ranger Donovan had made the call with the grim practicality of someone who'd seen too many searches end in body recovery rather than rescue. They'd covered 40 square miles, deployed K9 units, even brought in a helicopter when the weather briefly cleared. Austin's truck had been found parked at the 5 Mile Island trailhead, keys still in the ignition, his personal backpack undisturbed on the passenger seat. His duty belt, radio, and park-issued Garmin GPS were missing, standard equipment for a routine patrol. But Austin himself had vanished as completely as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Lauren toggled back to the map overlay on her computer, layering Austin's last known position over the wildlife avoidance zone. The correlation was exact. His final GPS ping, logged automatically by the park's tracking system at 14:47 on October 13th, placed him at the northwestern edge of the area where every tagged animal had systematically refused to enter for the past month. She felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, but its cerebral cousin. The recognition that her data was suggesting something her training refused to accept. Her office phone rang, startling her. The old landline, not her cell. She picked up on the third ring. "Mitchell. Lauren, it's Donovan." The chief ranger's voice carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. "I need you to come down to my office. There's someone here who wants to talk about Austin." "Who?" "His grandmother. She drove up from Portland this morning." Lauren checked her watch. 16:23. She'd been staring at the data for 3 hours without realizing it. "I'll be right there." The main ranger station occupied a log structure that smelled perpetually of coffee and wet wool. Lauren found Chief Ranger Donovan in his office with an elderly woman who looked carved from darker, older wood than the building itself. She wore a long black coat despite the indoor heating, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her face mapped with lines that spoke of harder years than the Pacific Northwest typically demanded. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Elena Crawford," Donovan said, gesturing to a chair. "Austin's grandmother." "Mrs. Crawford." Lauren sat, noting how the woman's eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, tracked her with an intensity that felt inappropriate for a grieving relative. "I'm so sorry about Austin. He was an excellent ranger. He's not lost," Elena interrupted, her accent thick, Eastern European, Romanian maybe. "He is taken." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Donovan shifted in his chair. "Mrs. Crawford believes there may be circumstances we haven't considered," he said carefully, in the tone of someone humoring a distraught family member while trying to maintain professional courtesy. "What circumstances?" Lauren asked, directing the question to Elena. The old woman leaned forward, her weathered hands folding atop the polished wood of Donovan's desk. "Austin's mother, my daughter. She married American man, moved here when Austin was baby. But Austin, he was born in Romania in Hunedoara County. He lived there until he was 3, and I tell him stories, old stories, stories his mother she want to forget." "What kind of stories?" "About things that walk in dark forests, things that hunt, things that..." She paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone thinking in a second language. "That are not natural." Lauren felt the rational part of her brain preparing to dismiss this as grief-induced superstition, but something stopped her. That cold sensation from earlier, the one triggered by the wildlife data, intensified. "Mrs. Crawford, Austin disappeared during a routine patrol. There's no evidence of..." "You find his radio?" Eleanor asked. "No." "His GPS machine?" "No." "What you find exactly?" Lauren glanced at Donovan, who gave a small nod. "His truck, his personal belongings. His last GPS signal placed him near the 5 Mile Island area, but we haven't found any physical trace of him since. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of struggle. The search teams found some boot prints matching Austin's patrol boots near an old logging road about a quarter-mile from his last position. But the trail went cold, literally. The prints just stopped." Elena's face remained impassive, but something in her eyes shifted. "When my grandson, when he visited me last month in Portland, I tell him something. I tell him about the old settlement in those forests, the Romanian settlement from 1890s, loggers. They come to Washington from Eastern Europe, many from Hunedoara, from my region. They bring old ways, old beliefs, and old things followed them. What things? Lauren asked, unable to keep the skepticism entirely from her voice. Strigoi, Eleanor said simply. The word hung in the air like smoke. Lauren had heard it before, vaguely, in the context of vampire folklore, but the popular culture version, capes and fangs and gothic castles, seemed absurd in the context of the Pacific Northwest's ancient rainforests. "You're talking about vampires?" she said, unable to mask her incredulity. "No." Elena's voice sharpened. "Not the Hollywood monsters. Strigoi is different. In old country, Strigoi is person who dies wrong way. Violent death, suicide, without proper burial rites. The soul, it does not rest. It returns, not as stupid corpse that drinks blood, as something intelligent, something that remembers being human but is no longer human. It hunts those who violate its territory, who disturb its rest." Donovan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Crawford, while we appreciate you coming all this way—" "Austin tell me he find something," Elena continued, ignoring him. "3 weeks ago he call me. He say he discover old graves in forest during survey work. Very old graves, unmarked. He take photographs, send them to me on his phone. I tell him, do not disturb them, leave that place alone. But Austin, he is scientist like you, Dr. Mitchell. He want to understand. He want to document. He sends soil samples to university. He make detailed maps." Lauren felt her pulse accelerate. "Do you still have those photographs?" Elena withdrew an old smartphone from her coat pocket, navigated with the laborious care of someone unfamiliar with the technology, and handed it to Lauren. The screen showed a series of images, weathered wooden crosses, barely visible beneath decades of moss and fern growth. Depressions in the earth, suggesting collapsed graves. One photograph captured a clearer marker, the wood carved with words in Romanian, and what might have been a symbol, 2 intersecting lines forming an X within a circle. "This symbol," Elena tapped the screen, "it is protection mark. We carve it on graves of those who might become Strigoi. It is meant to keep them in earth, to prevent the soul from rising. But if someone disturbs the grave, breaks the symbol, removes protective items we bury with body—" She trailed off meaningfully. "What items?" Lauren heard herself ask, drawn in despite her instinct to dismiss this as folklore. Iron nails, garlic beneath tongue, thorns wrapped in red cloth and placed over heart. If these are removed, if grave is violated, the Strigoi can rise. And once risen, it hunts in territory it claimed in life. It appears as shadow, as animal, sometimes as person the victim trusts. It does not kill immediately. It plays with prey, makes them lose their way, makes them see things, hear things, until they are so lost and so terrified that their soul becomes confused, becomes vulnerable. Then it takes them. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the window with renewed violence. Lauren looked at the photographs again, zooming in on the protective symbol. Her scientific training screamed that this was coincidence, superstition, the desperate attempt of a grieving grandmother to impose narrative on random tragedy. But the wildlife data wouldn't leave her mind. 37 animals, avoiding a specific area with no ecological explanation. An area that apparently contained an old Romanian cemetery that Austin had been investigating. "Where exactly did Austin find these graves?" she asked. Elena looked directly at her. "He sent me coordinates in one message." She navigated the phone again, showed Lauren a text message timestamp from September 18th, 47 tont 8394 degree N, 124.521 degree W. Lauren committed the numbers to memory. They were inside the wildlife avoidance zone. "Mrs. Crawford, thank you for bringing this to our attention," Donovan said, standing in the universal signal that the meeting was concluded. We'll certainly take this information into consideration. After Elena had been escorted out by one of the junior rangers, Donovan turned to Lauren with an expression that mixed embarrassment and pity. "Poor woman," he said. "Grief does strange things to people." "Those coordinates," Lauren said, "they're in the area I've been monitoring, the section where wildlife behavior has been anomalous." "What do you mean, anomalous?" She explained the data, the systematic avoidance, the timeline that coincided roughly with when Austin would have begun his survey work. Donovan listened with increasing skepticism. "Wildlife avoid areas for lots of reasons," he said finally. "Predator scent, toxic plants, geological instability. Just because we can't immediately explain it doesn't mean we start entertaining supernatural explanations." "I'm not entertaining anything. I'm saying there's a correlation worth investigating. The official search has been called off, Lauren. If you want to continue on your own time, as long as you follow proper safety protocols, that's your prerogative. But don't expect park resources for a wild goose chase based on a grieving grandmother's folk tales." Lauren stood. "I'm going to check those coordinates tomorrow morning. Full safety protocol. I'll log my route with dispatch and carry emergency beacon. Take someone with you. Everyone else is still recovering from 3 days of intensive search. I'll be fine." She left before he could argue further. That night, in her small rental cabin 3 miles from the visitor center, Lauren couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to rain attack the roof, thinking about Austin's meticulous nature, his careful documentation, his respect for protocols. He wouldn't have gotten lost. Not in an area he'd been surveying for weeks. Not without calling for help if something went wrong. Around 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and opened her laptop, searching for information on Romanian folklore, on Strigoi specifically. Most results were predictably useless, pop culture nonsense about Dracula and Gothic horror. But she found a few academic sources, anthropological studies of Eastern European folk beliefs, scholarly papers on death rituals in pre-Christian Romanian culture. The consistent elements were disturbing. Strigoi were not mindless monsters, but retained the intelligence and cunning of their human lives. They could shapeshift, taking forms of animals or appearing as people the victim knew. They hunted within specific territories, particularly forests they'd claimed through burial or violent death. They fed not on blood, but on life force, on the slow terror and confusion of their victims. And they were patient, methodical hunters who could stalk prey for days or weeks, isolating them, driving them mad before the final taking. One passage from a 1923 anthropological study caught her attention. The Strigoi is known to create zones of silence within its hunting grounds, areas where even animals refuse to enter, where the natural order seems subtly wrong. Locals report feelings of disorientation, of being watched, of sounds that should not exist. The forest itself appears to change, to become a labyrinth designed by malevolent intelligence. Lauren closed the laptop, her hands trembling slightly. She was a scientist. She didn't believe in supernatural entities, but she believed in data, and her data was telling her that something in that 12-square-mile section of the Hoh rainforest was fundamentally wrong. She needed to see those graves. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the rain temporarily suspended, but the sky promising it would return. Lauren filled out the proper forms with dispatch, marking her route on the park's logging system. 5 Mile Island trailhead to the coordinates Elena had provided. Roughly 4 miles into the rainforest, along an old logging road that had been abandoned since the 1960s. She packed methodically. Garmin GPS unit, backup compass, satellite phone, emergency beacon, first aid kit, 2 days' worth of food and water, though she planned to be back before nightfall. Her duty belt carried park radio, bear spray, and the heavy maglite that doubled as a defensive weapon if needed. The forest swallowed her within minutes of leaving the trailhead. The Hoh rainforest deserved its reputation as one of America's last true wilderness areas. Sitka spruce and western hemlock towered 300 feet overhead, their massive trunks wrapped in moss, so thick it looked like green velvet. The undergrowth grew dense and impossibly lush, sword ferns reaching waist-high, devil's club lurking with its spine-covered stems, nurse logs serving as the foundation for entire ecosystems of fungus and sapling trees. Everything dripped with moisture, the air itself seeming to have weight and texture. Lauren had worked in these forests for 3 years and still felt dwarfed by them, made microscopic by their ancient immensity. The trees here predated European contact with the Americas, had stood silent witness to centuries of human drama and tragedy. Walking through them always felt like trespassing in a cathedral built by time itself. She followed the old logging road, now barely discernible beneath decades of reclamation, her GPS tracking the route on its small screen. The forest should have been alive with sound, birdsong, the rustle of small mammals, the distant call of ravens, but it was too quiet. Not silent exactly, but muted, as if the normal soundtrack of the wilderness had been turned down to half volume. After 90 minutes of steady hiking, her GPS indicated she was close to the coordinates. She began scanning the forest floor more carefully, looking for the depressions Elena's photographs had shown, for weathered wooden crosses, for any sign of the old cemetery. She almost missed it. The site occupied a small clearing where the canopy opened enough to allow a shaft of grey daylight. What she'd initially mistaken for natural ground irregularities resolved into deliberate patterns. 20 or more grave-sized depressions arranged in rough rows, each barely visible beneath the forest's reclamation efforts. A few wooden markers remained upright, tilted at odd angles, their surfaces so weathered that any carved inscriptions had long since been eroded away. Lauren approached slowly, her trained eye cataloguing details. This was indeed a cemetery, probably dating from the late 1800s, based on the weathering patterns and the style of the remaining markers. The graves would have originally been outside the forest in a cleared area, but a century of growth had reclaimed the space, turning what had been open ground into part of the deep woods, and someone had been digging here recently. 3 graves showed clear signs of disturbance. The earth had been excavated, not carefully as archaeologists would work, but roughly, urgently. Soil had been piled beside the depressions. One of the old wooden markers lay broken beside its grave, the protective X within circle symbol Elena had mentioned clearly visible despite the wood's decay, now split directly through the center. Lauren's scientific instincts warred with a growing sense of wrongness. This was an archaeological site that should be documented, protected, studied properly. But it had been vandalized, violated in a way that felt deliberately malicious. She pulled out her camera and began photographing everything, making sure to capture the broken marker, the disturbed graves, the arrangement of the site. She was so focused on documentation that she almost didn't notice the smell. It came gradually, seeping into her awareness, something rotten, organic, but not quite like animal decay. It reminded her of the time she'd discovered a black bear that had been dead for 2 weeks in summer heat, except this smell had a sweeter edge to it, almost cloying, and underneath it, something else, something that made her sinuses burn. She straightened, looking around the clearing. The smell seemed to be coming from the deepest of the disturbed graves, the one farthest from the trail. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Lauren approached it. The grave had been dug deep, at least 6 feet down, the dark earth exposed like a wound in the forest floor. At the bottom, barely visible in the dim light, something gleamed. She knelt at the edge, training her flashlight into the depression. Bones. Human bones, unmistakably. A skull grinned up at her from the disturbed soil, its eye sockets filled with shadow. But what made Lauren's breath catch wasn't the skeleton itself. She'd worked enough wildlife mortality sites to be unfazed by bones. It was what had been done to it. The ribcage had been pried apart. The bones scattered. Iron nails corroded with age lay scattered around the grave. A bundle of what might have once been cloth, now rotted into barely recognizable scraps, lay discarded to one side. Someone had systematically removed the protective burial items Elena had described. Lauren's hands shook as she photographed the scene. This was a crime scene, potentially. Grave desecration at minimum. But something about the methodical nature of the disturbance, the way the iron nails had been carefully removed and placed aside, the way the cloth bundle had been unwrapped. A branch snapped behind her. She spun, flashlight cutting through the green-tinted darkness. Nothing. Just the dense wall of ferns and salal, the moss-wrapped trees standing silent as sentinels. "Hello!" Her voice sounded thin in the muted atmosphere. "Austin!" No response. But she could feel it now, what Elena had described, what the anthropological papers had mentioned, the sensation of being watched. Not by animal eyes. She'd been observed by bears and cougars often enough to recognize that particular prickle of awareness. This was different, more intentional, more intelligent. She needed to leave. Now, Lauren backed away from the graves, keeping her flashlight sweeping the perimeter. She'd documented enough. Donovan needed to see these photos, needed to understand that this site required archaeological investigation and potentially a criminal inquiry. And she needed to be out of these woods before... Her radio crackled to life, making her jump. "Oral. Lauren, do you copy?" The voice was distorted by static, barely intelligible. She grabbed the radio from her belt. "This is Mitchell. I copy. Who is this?" "Lauren, it's Austin." The voice clarified slightly, though still wrong somehow, the cadence off. "I need help. I'm lost. I'm at..." More static. "Can't find my way back, please." Her training kicked in immediately. Lost Ranger, immediate response protocol. "Austin, I'm near the 5 Mile Island area. What's your 20? Can you give me landmarks?" "I don't know. Everything looks the same. The trees..." His voice fractured into electronic noise. "Following me. Lauren, something's following me." "Austin, stay calm. Activate your emergency beacon. I can track your signal." "I can't find it. I can't find anything. It took my pack, Lauren. It took..." The transmission dissolved into static and then cut off entirely. "Austin, Austin, respond!" She switched channels, trying to raise dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Mitchell. I have possible contact with Crawford, requesting immediate SAR reactivation and..." "Dr. Mitchell..." It was Donovan's voice, or something approximating it, but wrong. The words stretched and compressed oddly. "Return to station immediately. Do not..." The signal died. Lauren stared at her radio. The LED display flickered, showing impossible signal strengths, channels that shouldn't exist. And underneath the electronic hiss, she could hear something else. Breathing. Slow, measured, watching. She switched the radio off completely and clipped it back to her belt with fingers that had gone numb. The forest around her seemed to have darkened, though her watch showed it was only 13 hours. The canopy hadn't changed, but the quality of light had, as if the day itself was being drained of luminosity. Something moved in her peripheral vision, a shadow slipping between trees, too large to be a deer, too fluid to be human. Lauren ran. The trail should have been easy to follow. She'd marked her route carefully with GPS waypoints every 100 yards. But the forest had changed somehow, become a maze of identical green corridors where every massive trunk looked like every other massive trunk. Her GPS showed her position, showed the trail that should be 20 yards to her left, but when she pushed through the undergrowth in that direction, she found only more forest, no trail. She stopped, chest heaving, forcing herself to think rationally. Panic kills in the wilderness, she knew this, taught it to volunteers every season. Getting lost wasn't about the forest changing, it was about human perception breaking down under stress, about the brain filling gaps with false patterns, about the way fear could make familiar terrain unrecognizable. except she'd hiked these forests for 3 years. She knew the specific shape of the old-growth Sitka spruce, could identify individual stands by the pattern of nurse logs and the species composition of undergrowth. And this wasn't right. The trees were too close together. The understory was too thick. The very topology of the ground beneath her feet felt wrong, sloping when her map said it should be level. The smell from the grave found her again, that cloying sweetness mixed with rot. It seemed to come from every direction at once, as if the forest itself was exhaling decay. Lauren pulled out her satellite phone, her last reliable link to the outside world. She'd paid for it out of her own pocket after a ranger had died 2 years ago when radio coverage failed in a critical moment. It should work anywhere, any conditions. The screen showed no signal, not weak signal, no signal at all, as if the satellites themselves had stopped existing. That was impossible. She was about to try again when she heard the voice. "Lauren!" It came from behind her, soft, almost gentle. Austin's voice, but not quite, like a recording played at slightly wrong speed. She turned slowly. Austin Crawford stood 30 feet away, partially obscured by a massive western red cedar. He wore his ranger uniform, looked exactly as she remembered him. Sandy brown hair, the slight gap between his front teeth visible when he smiled, the careful way he adjusted his duty belt that came from his training. But his eyes were wrong, too reflective, catching light that wasn't there, like an animal's eyeshine. "Austin?" Her voice cracked. "I've been looking for you." He took a step forward, and Lauren noticed his boots made no sound on the forest floor, left no impression in the soft earth. "You need to come with me. I found something important." "Where have you been? We've been searching for 3 days." "Time is strange here." Another step, his movements too fluid, too graceful, lacking the slight awkwardness she associated with his normal gait. "The forest keeps you if you let it. But I know the way out now. Come with me." Every instinct Lauren possessed screamed danger. This wasn't Austin, couldn't be Austin, but it looked like him, sounded almost like him, wore his face with such convincing accuracy that her rational mind struggled to reject the evidence of her own senses. "Show me your hands," she said. The thing wearing Austin's face paused. "What?" "Show me your hands." Austin had a scar on his left thumb from a fishing accident. "Show me." For 3 heartbeats, it didn't move. Then slowly, it raised its hands, palms out. The hands were perfect, too perfect. No scar, no calluses from work, no dirt under the nails. Just smooth, unmarked skin that looked like it had been copied from a catalog photograph of what hands should look like. "You're not Austin," Lauren said, her voice steadier than she felt. The thing's smile widened, stretching too far, revealing too many teeth. "No," it agreed, "but I knew him very well by the end. I know what he felt, what he feared, what he hoped. I consumed all of it." The forest darkened further, the grey daylight fading to twilight, though her watch still insisted it was early afternoon. The trees around her seemed to lean inward, their moss-covered trunks pressing closer, cutting off potential escape routes. "What are you?" Lauren whispered. "I am what returns when burial rites are violated, when the bones are disturbed and the protective iron is removed. Your friend Austin, he was so careful, so scientific. He documented everything, took soil samples, removed artifacts for dating. He never understood that some protections exist for a reason." The Austin thing began to change. Not dramatically, not like a horror movie transformation, but subtly, terrifyingly. Its proportions shifted, limbs lengthening, shoulders broadening, the uniform seeming to melt into shadow. Its face remained Austin's, but became somehow generic, a mask of humanity worn over something that had forgotten how to properly imitate the living. "He led me to you," it continued, its voice now layering multiple tones. Austin's overlaid with something older, colder, speaking English with the ghost of an Eastern European accent. By breaking the seal, he freed me, and the freed Strigoi must complete its hunt, must consume those who violated its rest. Austin was first. You who come seeking him are second. Lauren's hand moved to her bear spray, though some part of her knew it would be useless. I didn't disturb your grave, but you came to the place of bones. You photographed what should remain hidden. You carry the knowledge of where I rest. That is enough. It moved then, not walking but flowing across the space between them with impossible speed. Lauren triggered the bear spray directly into its face, the Austin face, and the thing recoiled not from pain, but from surprise, as if it had forgotten such defenses existed. She ran again, no longer caring about GPS waypoints or rational navigation. Driven purely by the animal imperative to escape, the forest became a blur of green and grey, her boots hammering against the earth, her breath burning in her lungs. Behind her, she could hear it following, not running. It didn't need to run. It knew these woods in ways she never could, but she could hear its voice calling to her, sometimes using Austin's voice, sometimes her mother's voice, once even her own voice calling out in confused terror. The ground beneath her feet suddenly wasn't there. She fell, sliding down a steep embankment she hadn't seen coming, crashed through Devil's Club that shredded her uniform sleeves, and landed hard in a creek bed she didn't recognize from any of her survey maps. The impact drove the air from her lungs, left her gasping in 6 inches of ice-cold water that soaked through her clothes instantly. Above her, at the top of the embankment, something stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. Not Austin anymore. Not even approximately human. It had given up pretense, now showing its true nature, something gaunt and elongated, with limbs that bent wrong, and a face that was mostly shadow, with points of luminescence where eyes should be. It began to descend the embankment, moving like liquid smoke, like shadow-given substance. Lauren's hand found her emergency beacon on her belt. The one that broadcast directly to rescue services via satellite, the one that was supposed to work anywhere. She activated it with numb fingers, knowing it was probably futile, that whatever this thing was, it existed in a space where normal rules didn't apply. The Strigoi reached the creek bed, its form resolving into something that hurt to look at directly, as if her brain couldn't quite process what her eyes were reporting. It leaned over her, and she could smell that rot sweetness again, could feel the cold radiating from it like heat from a fire but inverse, draining warmth and life. "Your fear is exquisite," it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Austin's fear was sharp and bright. Yours is deeper. You understand more. Your mind grasps what is happening even as it tries to reject it. That makes it better, richer." Lauren found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. The protection symbol, the X in the circle, it kept you bound for a century. There must be a way to what? Bind me again. It laughed, a sound like bones scraping stone. You would need iron blessed by Orthodox priest. You would need to speak words in language older than this continent. You would need faith in things your scientific mind rejected long ago. You have none of these. It was right. She knew it was right. But Lauren Mitchell hadn't become a wildlife biologist by accepting defeat when faced with impossible problems. Her mind raced, cataloging everything Elena had told her, everything she'd read in those anthropological papers, searching for any advantage, any weakness in folklore that might apply to the thing currently manifesting in front of her. Strigoi hunted specific territories. They fed on fear and confusion. They were bound by certain rules, certain limitations rooted in the folk magic that had created protections against them. And they retained memories of their human lives, retained human intelligence even in this corrupted form. "What was your name?" she asked, "when you were alive?" The thing paused, its inhuman face tilting in what might have been curiosity. "Why?" Because you were human once. You had a name, a life. People who buried you with those protections because they knew you, cared about you enough to try to ensure your soul found peace. Ioan Popescu, it said after a long moment. I was logger. I came from Hunedoara in 1891. I worked these forests for 3 years before tree fell wrong and crushed me. My crew, they buried me here because I had no family to send body home. They did the old rituals. They thought it would be enough. But something went wrong. I died angry, died afraid, died knowing I would never see home again, never be buried in blessed ground with proper Orthodox rites. The anger did not fade when my body cooled. It grew, fed on itself. When I opened my eyes again, I was not in afterlife. I was still here, still in the dark earth, still conscious, aware. For 123 years I have been aware, trapped in the dark, unable to move, unable to die properly. And all that time I hungered. Lauren pushed herself into a sitting position, her back against the creek bank, water soaking through her remaining dry clothing. Austin freed you. He removed the nails, broke the binding symbol. Yes, I fed on him over 3 days, drew out every memory, every fear, every hope. When I finished, there was nothing left. Not even bones. His essence is part of me now. And now, you want mine. No. The Strigoy's form flickered, briefly becoming something almost human again. A gaunt man in old-fashioned work clothes before collapsing back into shadow. Now I am going to take yours, but slower. You are more interesting than Austin. You came seeking him. You carry knowledge of folklore, of protective rituals. You understand what I am. That understanding will flavor your fear beautifully. The emergency beacon on Lauren's belt emitted a single sharp beep, indicating it had achieved satellite lock and was broadcasting. The Strigoy's attention snapped to it, and Lauren saw something she hadn't expected in its luminous eyes. Concern. What is that? It demanded. Emergency locator. It just transmitted my exact coordinates to every rescue service in Washington state. They know exactly where I am. No one will come. This is my territory. I control it. Your devices do not function here, but the beacon beeped again, regular pulse confirming continuous transmission. And Lauren saw the Strigoi retreat slightly, its form becoming less solid, less present. Interesting, she said, her mind working through the implications. You can manipulate radios, GPS units, phones, technology that requires complex signals, that you can interfere with, confuse. But this beacon is simple, just a transponder broadcasting on a fixed frequency. Nothing to manipulate, nothing complex to corrupt. The Strigoy's form flickered more rapidly now, anger and uncertainty radiating from it like heat. They will not arrive in time. Maybe not, but they're coming. And that means your territory isn't as controlled as you think, which means the rules still apply. You're not all-powerful, Ioan Popescu. You're still bound by the folklore that created you. I am bound by nothing, but even as it said this, the darkness around them lightened fractionally. Lauren could hear something in the distance that might have been a helicopter, though that was probably wishful thinking. The Strigoi heard it too, its head snapping upward, tracking the sound. Your scientific mind, it hissed. It protects you. Belief creates vulnerability. You barely believe I exist, even as you see me. That makes you difficult to feed from. Incomplete. Then you made a mistake targeting me. Lauren pulled herself fully upright, standing in the creek bed, facing the entity. Austin believed in you. At least part of him did. He heard his grandmother's stories. He understood the significance of what he'd found. That's why you could take him so completely. But I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence and hypothesis and testing theories. Even now, part of me thinks you're a hallucination, a stress response, a symptom of dehydration or hypothermia, an E. The Strigoi's form became increasingly unstable, fragmenting into multiple shadows that seemed to war with each other for dominance. You will believe. I will make you believe. I will show you things that break your rational mind, that force you to accept. The helicopter sound was unmistakable now, growing louder, approaching from the north. And with it came something else, voices calling through the forest, multiple voices, a search team. The Strigoi let out a sound like wind, screaming through dead trees, and dissolved into the gathering darkness, not disappearing, but fragmenting, becoming part of the natural shadows of the forest, indistinguishable from ordinary darkness once more. Lauren stood alone in the creek bed, shivering violently, her emergency beacon still pulsing its location to the rescuers approaching through the woods. She could see lights now, flashlight beams cutting through the gloom, and hear voices calling her name. "Here!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "I'm here!" The rescue team found her 10 minutes later, 4 rangers led by Chief Donovan, all of them looking exhausted and worried. They wrapped her in emergency blankets, checked her for injuries, demanded to know what had happened. Lauren told them she'd gotten disoriented near the old cemetery site, had fallen down an embankment, and activated her beacon. She didn't mention the Strigoi, didn't mention the thing wearing Austin's face, didn't mention any of it because she knew how it would sound. She was a scientist, she dealt in evidence. And what evidence did she have? Photographs of disturbed graves? GPS data showing wildlife avoidance, her own testimony about experiencing, what? Hallucinations brought on by stress and hypothermia. They helicoptered her out as darkness fell completely over the forest. From the air, she could see the Hoh rainforest stretching in all directions, a dark green carpet of ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of human tragedy and triumph. Somewhere down there in that 12-square-mile zone that animals refused to enter, Ioan Popescu waited, still hunting, still hungry. At Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles, they treated her for mild hypothermia and released her with instructions to take a few days off. Donovan visited her hospital room before she left. "The search for Austin is officially suspended," he said. "The teams swept the cemetery area you photographed. They found evidence of disturbance, but no sign of Austin. No tracks, no equipment, nothing. It's like he vanished into thin air. What about the graves, the archaeological site?" "We've contacted the State Historic Preservation Office. They're sending a team next week to document and protect the site. Apparently it's the only known Romanian settler cemetery in western Washington. Significant historical value." He paused. "Lauren, what really happened out there?" She met his eyes. "I got lost, that's all." He didn't believe her. She could see it in his face. But he also didn't press further. Elena Crawford called her 2 days later at her cabin. Lauren had been avoiding the phone, avoiding everyone, spending her suspended work time reviewing the photographs she'd taken, the wildlife data, trying to make sense of everything through the lens of science. "Dr. Mitchell," Eleanor's accented voice was sad but unsurprised. "I hear you survive encounter with what took my grandson." "I got lost in the woods," Lauren said automatically. "You know better now. You know what walks there." Lauren was quiet for a long moment. Rain drummed against her cabin windows with familiar persistence. "Mrs. Crawford, in scientific terms, I experienced a trauma response combined with environmental stressors that created hallucinatory experiences consistent with folklore I had recently been exposed to. That's the rational explanation." "But you do not believe rational explanation anymore." "I believe evidence, and the evidence is that Austin is missing, that cemetery had been disturbed, and that I experienced something in those woods that I cannot adequately explain." Elena's voice softened. "My grandson, he is gone. I know this. I accept this. But you survive. That means something. Strigoi does not let prey escape unless prey has protection it does not expect. Your science, it protects you. Your skepticism is like shield. As long as you barely believe, it cannot fully feed. That's not how science works, Mrs. Crawford. Perhaps, but you are still alive. Austin is not. There is evidence in that difference, yes? After Elena hung up, Lauren sat in her cabin watching rain sheet down the windows, thinking about belief and evidence, about rational explanations and the limits of human understanding. She thought about Ioan Popescu, crushed by a falling tree in 1894, buried with iron nails and protective symbols by co-workers who understood the old ways. She thought about him lying conscious in the dark earth for more than a century, aware and angry and hungry, until Austin Crawford's scientific curiosity broke the binding that held him. And she thought about the wildlife data, about 37 tagged animals systematically avoiding a 12-square-mile section of temperate rainforest, about the way science sometimes documented phenomena it couldn't explain, about how the absence of explanation didn't equal the absence of reality. She pulled up the GPS tracking data on her laptop, watched the colored lines showing animal movement patterns over the past 6 months. The avoidance zone remained unchanged. Nothing had entered it in 72 days. Nothing lived there anymore except ancient trees and whatever haunted the darkness between them. Lauren marked the area in her research files with a note. Ecological dead zone. Cause unknown. Recommend long-term monitoring and avoidance. It was the most honest assessment she could make while still maintaining her scientific credibility. That night, she dreamed of the forest, of shadows that moved with intelligent purpose, of a voice calling her name in tones that layered Austin's voice over something much older. She woke at 3 a.m., her cabin dark except for the clock's LED display, and saw something standing outside her window. It might have been a tree branch moving in the wind. It might have been a trick of light and shadow. It might have been the lingering effects of trauma manifesting as waking nightmares. But for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw Austin's face looking in at her, his eyes reflecting light that wasn't there, his expression hungry and hollow and not quite right. The next morning, she called the park superintendent and tendered her resignation. She told him she'd been offered a position in California, something she'd been considering for a while. It was a lie. She had no job lined up, no plan, except to leave the Pacific Northwest, to put distance between herself and the Hoh rainforest, between herself and the thing that hunted in the darkness beneath the ancient trees. 2 weeks later, as she packed the last boxes from her cabin, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a small iron nail, corroded with age, and a note in Elena Crawford's careful handwriting. For protection, keep with you always. Some hunts are not finished just because prey escapes. Some hunters are very patient, and some territories are larger than they first appear. May you stay rational. May your science shield you. May your skepticism keep you safe. But just in case, keep the iron close. EC. Lauren added the nail to her keychain, telling herself it was just a piece of metal, just a reminder of an experience that could be explained through trauma psychology and environmental stresses. She told herself this even as she avoided forests whenever possible in her new life, even as she found herself checking reflections in windows and mirrors to verify she was alone, even as she occasionally caught a smell on the wind that reminded her of rot and sweetness mixed together in a way that made her sinuses burn. She told herself she didn't believe, but she kept the nail close anyway, because evidence supported rational conclusions. And the evidence suggested that some protections, some superstitions, some old ways of understanding the world had survived for centuries precisely because they worked, even if science couldn't explain why. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Daniel Warren was explaining to a semicircle of 23 tourists why skinwalkers weren't real when Lauren Daniels started screaming through his radio. "The Navajo people," he said, gesturing toward the ancient cliff dwellings carved into the red sandstone walls of Canyon de Chelly, created these stories as cautionary tales. Yenald Lushi, what pop culture calls skinwalkers, were meant to reinforce cultural taboos, not to describe actual shape-shifting witches. He smiled that practice smile he'd perfected over 15 years of ranger presentations, the one that said, "I'm educated and you're not, but I'll humor your superstitions. I promise you, in my decade and a half working this..." The Motorola radio clipped to his shoulder erupted with static, then Lauren's voice cut through, shrill and wrong. "Daniel, oh God, Daniel, it's wearing my face. I'm looking at myself and it's smiling with my mouth, but I can see, Jesus Christ, I can see what's underneath. And it's..." The transmission dissolved into sounds that made the tourists step back. Wet, tearing noises, something that might have been laughter, or might have been an animal in distress. And underneath it all, a low clicking that Daniel's rational mind insisted was interference, but his hindbrain recognized as articulated speech in a language humans weren't meant to understand. Daniel's smile evaporated. He grabbed the radio, aware that 23 pairs of eyes were now fixed on him instead of the ruins. "Lauren, this is Warren. Confirm your location and status. This isn't funny." Static. Then her voice again, but different. Flatter, with wrong emphasis on the syllables, like someone learning to speak by mimicking recordings. "Funny. Yes. Ha, ha. Daniel, I am at the Spider Rock Overlook. Something is wrong with my words. They keep coming out sideways." One of the tourists, a middle-aged woman with a sun visor and a University of New Mexico t-shirt, raised her hand like she was in class. "Is this part of the presentation? Because it's quite effective." Daniel ignored her. Lauren had been his patrol partner for 8 months, transferred from Yosemite after some incident she never discussed in detail. She was professional, methodical, not the type to stage elaborate pranks. And Spider Rock, that was 12 miles southeast, a sacred site to the Navajo where, according to legend, Spider-Woman lived and taught humans to weave. Lauren had been assigned to clear the overlook of tourists before sunset, standard protocol for protecting both visitors and the cultural significance of the site. "All visitors need to return to your vehicles," Daniel announced, his ranger voice cutting through the murmuring crowd. "We're experiencing a communication emergency and need to clear the area immediately." "But we paid for the full sunset tour," a man in cargo shorts protested. "You'll receive a full refund at the visitor center. Please proceed directly to the parking area. Now," the radio crackled again. "Daniel, the sun is wrong. It's watching me with too many eyes, and they're all the same eye, just multiplied across the sky like reflections in broken mirrors. Do you see it? Do you see what it's really been this whole time?" The tourists were moving now, some quickly toward the parking lot half a mile back, others lingering to film with their smartphones, because of course they were. Daniel was already running toward his truck, a white Ford F-350 with the National Park Service emblem on the door, and a light bar that he activated as soon as he climbed in. His personal iPhone showed 4:47 p.m., approximately 90 minutes until sunset. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read 93 degrees Fahrenheit, hot even for late June in Arizona. He radioed the ranger station as he drove. "Station, this is Warren. I have a possible 1054 at Spider Rock Overlook. Ranger Daniels is reporting incoherent and possibly experiencing heat exhaustion or altered mental status, requesting immediate backup and medical standby." The voice that answered was Tom Begay, a Navajo ranger who'd worked Canyon de Chelly for 20 years and tolerated Daniel's skepticism about local traditions with bemused patience. "Copy, Warren. I'm en route from White House ruins. ETA 20 minutes. Did she say anything specific? Daniel hesitated. On the radio, where other rangers and potentially the press could monitor, negative, just confused speech patterns, possible environmental exposure. What he didn't say. She claimed something was wearing her face. She said the sun had too many eyes. She spoke like someone who'd forgotten how language worked and was rebuilding it from fragments. The road to Spider Rock was unpaved, a winding track that followed the canyon rim through landscape that looked alien. All red rock and sparse vegetation, piñon pines and juniper twisted by wind into shapes that suggested writhing. This was Navajo Nation land, leased to the National Park Service through a complex agreement that required careful respect for the tribe's sovereignty and sacred sites. Daniel had studied the cultural protocols extensively when he transferred here from Sequoia National Park 3 years ago, learned the proper way to request permission before entering certain areas, memorized which sites were photographable and which weren't. But he'd always approached it as anthropology, not belief. The stories were fascinating cultural artifacts, not warnings. His radio had gone silent. Daniel tried raising Lauren every 30 seconds. Daniels, Warren, confirm status, over. Nothing but static that occasionally resolved into sounds that might have been wind through the canyons or might have been breathing. At 8 miles, his iPhone lost signal completely. Standard for the area. Cellular towers were sparse on the reservation, and the canyon walls created dead zones that even satellite phones struggled with. Daniel's dashboard GPS still functioned, showing his position as a blue dot crawling along the canyon rim toward the coordinates of Spider Rock Overlook. At 10 miles, he saw the first sign that something was genuinely wrong. Lauren's truck sat in the Overlook parking area, driver's door hanging open, engine still running. Her ranger hat lay in the dust beside it, and nearby, Daniel's stomach tightened, what looked like a small pile of clothing. No, not clothing, skin. Sheets of it, translucent and membranous, like a snake's shed scales but shaped wrong, with appendages that didn't map to human anatomy. Daniel stopped his truck 20 feet back and approached on foot, one hand on the canister of bear spray at his belt, even though bears didn't live in this desert ecosystem. The skin, and it was definitely skin, he could see pores and hair follicles, and the delicate network of capillaries beneath the surface, was still damp, as if recently discarded. It lay in the dust like a collapsed balloon, vaguely humanoid, but with too many joints in the arms and a torso that seemed to have split open from the inside. "What the actual fuck?" Daniel whispered and pulled out his GoPro camera. He filmed the scene methodically, documenting the abandoned truck, the hat, the impossible organic material that his brain insisted couldn't be real, even as his hands trembled filming it. The timestamp on the camera read 5:23 p.m., 73 minutes until sunset. A sound made him turn, footsteps on sandstone, light and quick. Lauren stood at the edge of the overlook, silhouetted against the red cliffs of the canyon. She wore her ranger uniform, and from this distance, everything looked normal. But she stood too still, with her weight distributed wrong, like she was balancing on joints that bent in directions human legs didn't accommodate. "Lauren!" Daniel called out, staying near his truck. "Are you okay? We need to get you checked out." She turned toward him, and even from 30 feet away, Daniel could see that her eyes weren't tracking properly, the left following his movement, while the right remained fixed on something above and behind him. When she spoke, her lips moved a half-second out of sync with the sounds. "Daniel, I called. You came. That's good. That's what partners do." "You're scaring me. I need you to walk toward me slowly. We'll get you to a hospital, figure out what's happening." Hospital. She tilted her head 90 degrees, far beyond what human neck vertebrae allowed. Interesting. Place where broken things go, to be fixed or studied. Am I broken? Daniel. Behind him, from inside Lauren's truck, the radio activated. His own voice came through the speaker. "Lauren, are you okay? We need to get you checked out." exactly what he'd just said, in his inflection, perfect mimicry. Then Lauren's voice, but wrong, stilted. "Daniel, I called, you came." Daniel spun back to the overlook edge. Lauren, or what stood wearing Lauren's shape, was smiling now, and her teeth were wrong. Too many of them, arranged in rows that receded back into her throat like a shark's mouth. "The radio," she said, "is just vibrations, sound waves, shaped into, patterns, easy to, copy, like wearing, a voice, the way I'm wearing, this." She reached up and touched her face. Her fingers sank into the skin like it was clay, reshaping her features with wet, squelching sounds that carried clearly across the parking area. Daniel watched, his rational mind screaming that this was impossible, as Lauren's face melted and reformed into his face. His narrow nose, his 5-day stubble, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. The thing wearing his face smiled with his mouth. "Much harder," it said in his voice, "to copy. The inside, the meat, the bones, takes time, takes practice." Lauren screamed, "For so long, while I practiced." Daniel's hand found his radio. "Tom, I need immediate backup at Spider Rock. Officer down, repeat, officer down. Situation is..." What? Impossible? Supernatural? He was a skeptic, had built his entire career on rational explanations, had literally been mocking the Skinwalker legends minutes before this started. "Situation is extreme. Be advised. Subject is armed and dangerous." Tom Begay's voice came through, calm and steady. "Warren, I'm 5 minutes out. Can you confirm the threat?" The thing at the overlook edge was changing again, Lauren's uniform splitting open as the body beneath expanded, joints reversing, limbs elongating into configurations that defied anatomy. It dropped to all fours, all sixes, and Daniel saw with crystalline horror that it was growing additional appendages, emerging from the torso like tree branches from a trunk. The face cycled through shapes. Lauren, Daniel, Tom Begay, tourists Daniel had met, people he didn't recognize, flickering faster and faster until it was just a blur of human features melting into one another. "Negative," Daniel whispered into the radio. "Cannot confirm. Tom, listen to me. The stories, the ones you told me about Yanald Lushi, the ones I said were bullshit. I need to know if they mentioned how to..." "Run," Tom's voice cut through. "Don't engage. Don't look at it directly. Don't let it touch you. And for God's sake, Daniel, don't let it speak to you in voices you love. That's how it gets into your head." The creature that had been Lauren launched itself forward with impossible speed, covering the 30 feet between them in a single fluid movement that involved too many joints bending in too many directions. Daniel threw himself sideways, rolling behind his truck as something that felt like fingers, but moved like tentacles grasped for his ankle. He kicked backward, felt his boot connect with flesh that had too much give, like striking a balloon full of meat. His truck. The keys were in the ignition. Daniel scrambled around the front bumper, yanked the door open, and threw himself inside. The creature was already there, somehow having circled the vehicle faster than physics allowed, pressing its faces against the passenger window. The glass fogged with its breath, and in the condensation symbols appeared, spirals and angular shapes that hurt to look at, that seemed to rotate even though they were static. Daniel slammed the truck into reverse, tires spraying gravel. The creature clung to the passenger door, fingers that were too long and had too many knuckles scrabbling at the window frame. He swerved hard left, trying to shake it off, but it adjusted its grip with liquid ease, now climbing onto the hood, now staring at him through the windshield with eyes that were all pupil, black and reflective and containing depth that shouldn't fit inside a human skull. It spoke with Lauren's voice, but also Tom's and Daniel's mother's and his dead father's. "You explained to tourists that we aren't real, that we're cautionary tales. But Daniel, what if the caution was real and the tale was just how humans tried to make sense of us. Daniel floored the accelerator, racing backward down the unpaved road. The creature flowed across the hood like liquid, reforming itself to maintain balance. Through the windshield, Daniel saw its torso split open, revealing not organs but more faces, smaller ones, child-sized, all screaming silently. He recognized one of them, Thomas Ashkey, a Navajo teenager who'd gone missing from the reservation 6 months ago. The case was still open, assumed to be a runaway. "Oh, Jesus," Daniel breathed. "You're collecting them. You're wearing people." "Wearing," the creature agreed. And now it was speaking in Thomas Ashkey's voice, a 16-year-old boy's voice cracking with puberty and terror. At first, then becoming, then forgetting. Which was the mask and which was the face. "Daniel, I used to be one person. Now I'm 17, and I can't remember which one was me." A vehicle appeared in Daniel's rearview mirror. Tom Begay's truck, light bar flashing. The older ranger pulled alongside Daniel's backward trajectory and leaned out his window. "Brake right," he shouted. "Give me a shot." Daniel wrenched the wheel. His truck fishtailed, tires losing grip in the loose gravel. The creature on his hood turned toward Tom's vehicle, faces cycling faster now. A strobe effect of human features that made Daniel's eyes water trying to process. Tom raised something, not a gun but a leather pouch, old and worn, tied with red cord. He threw it with practiced accuracy. The pouch struck the creature's torso and exploded in a cloud of yellow powder. Corn pollen, Daniel's educated brain supplied uselessly, sacred to the Navajo, used in blessing ceremonies. The creature shrieked, a sound that came from all its mouths simultaneously, harmonizing in frequencies that made Daniel's inner ear spasm. It released its grip on the truck and fell, hitting the ground and immediately sprinting on appendages that kept multiplying, 4 legs becoming 6, becoming 8, scrambling toward the canyon edge and launching itself over the rim into 300 feet of empty air. Tom's truck screeched to a halt. The older ranger jumped out, pulling Daniel from his vehicle with hands that shook despite his calm expression. "You okay? Did it touch you? Did it speak to you in anyone's voice you recognized?" "Multiple voices," Daniel managed. His own hands were shaking, his carefully constructed worldview shattered like the windshield of his truck, which he now noticed was spiderwebbed with cracks radiating from where the creature's faces had pressed against it. "Tom, what the fuck was that? What the actual fuck?" "Yenald Lushi," Tom said simply. He was already moving toward the canyon edge, pulling out his own radio. "Station, this is Begay. We have confirmed sighting of hostile indigenous entity at Spider Rock. I'm declaring the area a cultural emergency zone. Evacuate all visitors from canyon access points and seal the monument until further notice. Contact the tribal council immediately. We're going to need a sing." "A sing?" Daniel followed him to the overlook. Below, the canyon stretched for miles, its walls carved into fantastic shapes by centuries of erosion. There was no sign of the creature, no body at the bottom, no movement on the cliff faces, just empty air and red rock and the lengthening shadows of approaching sunset. "A ceremonial healing," Tom explained, "the kind that requires a hatali, a medicine man. Daniel, you need to understand something. What you just saw, what took Lauren, this doesn't happen randomly. Skinwalkers are made, not born. Someone performed the forbidden rituals, violated the deepest taboos of my people. Someone chose to become that thing by killing someone they loved." Daniel's mind spun. That's anthropology, cultural belief systems. You're telling me it's literal?" Tom turned to face him, and Daniel saw something in the older ranger's eyes that might have been pity or might have been anger. "You spent 15 years explaining to tourists that our stories were metaphors, that the Yenald Lushi was a cautionary tale about the corrupting nature of dark ambition. You were half right. It is about corruption. But it's not a metaphor, Daniel. It's a documentation. Our ancestors weren't primitive people creating myths to explain natural phenomena. They were trying to warn future generations about real dangers, and you've been telling everyone those warnings were bullshit. The sun was setting now, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and crimson that looked uncomfortably like fresh blood. Daniel stared at the shed skin still lying in the parking area, already beginning to decay in the heat, dissolving into a sticky residue that would probably be gone by morning. Evidence that would evaporate before he could collect it properly, leaving him with just his GoPro footage and his shattered certainty. "Lauren," he said, "is she dead?" Tom didn't answer immediately. He walked to the shed skin, careful not to touch it, and examined it from multiple angles. "This was the discarding," he finally said, "the final stage. The skinwalker wears its victim's form while consuming their essence, their memories, their identity. When the wearing is complete, when there's nothing left of the original person to sustain, the skin is shed and the creature moves on to the next victim. So yes, Daniel. Lauren Daniels is dead. She's been dead since sometime this morning, probably. What you saw, what spoke to you, that was the thing that ate her, wearing her like a costume while it learned to be her." Daniel's legs gave out. He sat down hard in the dust, his back against his truck's rear tire. Somewhere in the canyon, a raven called, or something imitating a raven. The sound echoed off the rock walls, multiplying and distorting until it became a chorus of artificial bird cries that faded into silence. "The radio transmission," Daniel said. "She called for help. Was that really her?" "Probably the last of her," Tom said quietly. "The final fragments of consciousness, trying to warn you while the skinwalker was still integrating her memories. They're not perfect copies, especially at first. The mimicry takes practice. That's why the speech was wrong, the body language was off. It was still learning how to be Lauren Daniels. And now it knows how to be me too." Daniel touched his face, the face that the creature had copied with such casual precision. "It studied me, copied my features, my voice. Why?" "Because you're next." Tom held out his hand, helping Daniel to his feet. "It wanted you to see what it could do, wanted you to understand what's coming. Skinwalkers don't just kill, Daniel, they terrorize first. They break you mentally before they break you physically. It's going to use Lauren's face, your face, the faces of everyone you've ever loved, to get inside your head. And when you're vulnerable enough, when you can't trust your own eyes anymore, that's when it'll strike." The tribal council meeting took place in a concrete building in Chinle, the nearest town to Canyon de Chelly. Daniel sat in a folding chair, his GoPro footage playing on a laptop screen, while 3 elderly Navajo men and 2 women watched with expressions that ranged from grim to resigned. Tom translated when necessary, though most of the council members spoke fluent English. They'd been speaking Navajo among themselves when Daniel arrived, conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered. "This is the 3rd incident in 18 months, one of the councilwomen said after the footage ended. Her name was Betty Tsinney, and she wore a turquoise squash blossom necklace that looked older than the building they sat in. The Ashkey boy, that hiker from Texas, now your ranger, and there will be more unless we act." "Do you know who's creating them?" Daniel asked. His voice sounded hollow to his own ears. He'd been awake for 27 hours, sustained by coffee and adrenaline, and the horrible understanding that everything he'd believed about reality was wrong. Tom said skinwalkers are made by people who violate taboos. Someone local is doing this. The council members exchanged glances. Betty Tsinney spoke carefully. "We have suspicions, but the person we suspect disappeared into the canyons 3 weeks ago, left their home, their family, everything. By the time we realized what they might have done, might have become, they were gone. And now they're hunting," another council member added. "Collecting faces, collecting power. The old stories say that skinwalkers grow stronger with each person they consume. First, it's just mimicry, copying appearances and voices. Then it's taking memories, skills, knowledge. Eventually, if they consume enough, they can become anyone perfectly. Walk among us undetected. That's when they're most dangerous. Daniel thought about the faces he'd seen in the creature's torso, screaming silently. Thomas Ashkey, others he didn't recognize. And soon, if the creature succeeded, Lauren Daniels, his own face integrated into that writhing collection of stolen identities. How do we stop it? He asked. Tom and the council members looked at each other. Betty Sinney finally answered, "Traditionally, a skinwalker can only be killed by speaking its true name while it wears its true face. But if it's been 3 weeks since the transformation, it may not remember its true face anymore. It may not remember its true name. And then what? We just wait for it to kill more people? We perform a sing," Tom said, "a ceremony that will draw it out, force it to confront what it's become. If we're lucky, if the person it used to be is still buried somewhere inside, we might be able to reach them, make them remember their humanity, make them choose to end what they've become. And if we're not lucky..." Silence. Betty Sinney stood up. "We'll perform the ceremony at Spider Rock tomorrow night. It's a sacred site, a place of power. Spider-Woman is said to have taught our people many things. Weaving, yes, but also how to recognize patterns, how to see the threads that connect us to our ancestors, to the land, to each other. If anywhere can show a skinwalker what it's lost, what it's destroyed by becoming a monster, it's there." "You're using me as bait," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "You're what it wants next," Tom confirmed. "Your face, your identity. And yes, we're using that. The Hatali will perform the ceremony, but you'll need to be present. You'll need to confront it directly. Face what you've always refused to believe was real." Daniel wanted to refuse. Every rational bone in his body screamed at him to refuse, to drive back to Flagstaff and resign from the Park Service and move somewhere without legends, somewhere where reality behaved according to the rules he'd spent his life learning. But Lauren Daniels was dead. Thomas Ashkey was dead. Others he'd never meet were dead, their faces trapped in that creature's torso, screaming forever. "I'll do it," he said. The ceremony began at sunset. Daniel stood at the Spider Rock overlook, the same spot where he'd encountered the creature 24 hours earlier. Around him, a circle of corn pollen had been laid out in intricate patterns by Harrison Yazzie, an elderly Hatali who'd arrived from Window Rock with a leather case full of ceremonial materials. Tom Begay stood outside the circle with 3 other Navajo Rangers, all of them carrying pouches similar to the one Tom had used to drive off the creature. "The pollen is a barrier," Harrison explained as he worked. He spoke English with only a slight accent, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to harmonize with the canyon winds. "It represents life, growth, blessing. The skinwalker is the opposite. Death, decay, curse. It can't cross the circle as long as the pattern remains intact. But you, Ranger Warren, you'll need to step outside it when the time comes. You'll need to face the creature without protection." "Why can't we just destroy it?" Daniel asked. "Shoot it, burn it, whatever it takes." "Because it used to be a person," Harrison said simply. He was creating a sand painting now, using colored sands to form symbols that resembled the disturbing spirals the creature had breathed onto Daniel's truck window. They made a terrible choice, violated sacred laws, became something monstrous. But they were human once. They had a family, friends, a name. If we can reach that person, remind them of who they were, there's a chance, small but real, that they'll choose to end their own existence, that they'll step into the sun, or fall onto a blade, or simply will themselves to stop. That's the only true death for a skinwalker. They have to choose it. And if they don't choose it? Harrison met his eyes. Then many more people will die, and one of them will be you. The sun touched the horizon, turning the canyon walls into curtains of fire. Daniel's shadow stretched long and thin behind him, pointing east like an accusation. His hands were shaking again, though whether from fear or exhaustion or simple acknowledgement of how completely his worldview had collapsed, he couldn't say. Harrison began to sing. The words were in Navajo, ancient and rhythmic, building in complexity as he circled the pollen barrier. Other voices joined, Tom and the Rangers, their harmonies weaving through Harrison's lead in patterns that seemed to pull at something in the air itself. Daniel felt it, a thrumming in his bones, a resonance that grew stronger as the ceremony intensified. The creature came at full dark. It walked out of the canyon on two legs, wearing Lauren Daniels' face, but making no attempt to hide what it was. The ranger uniform hung in tatters from a body that had too many joints, too many places where flesh folded in on itself in anatomically impossible configurations. But the face, Lauren's face, was perfect. Every freckle, every line, every subtle expression copied with absolute fidelity. "Daniel," it said in Lauren's voice, "why are you making them sing? It hurts. The sounds, they hurt." "Because you killed her," Daniel said. His voice steadied as he spoke, anger burning away fear. "You killed Lauren and Thomas Ashkey and God knows how many others. You're wearing their faces like trophies." The creature tilted its head, Lauren's head. "Trophies, no, not trophies, memories. I collect memories when I wear their faces. I remember what they remembered, their childhood, their loves, their fears. I know everything. Lauren Daniels knew I know about her daughter in Portland, the one she doesn't talk to because of the incident at Yosemite." Daniel's stomach twisted. Lauren had never mentioned a daughter. "I know about your father," the creature continued, stepping closer to the pollen circle. "The one who died when you were 12. The one you blame yourself for. Because you were supposed to be watching him take his medication, but you were playing video games instead." "Stop," Daniel whispered. "I know about Tom Begay's wife, the one who left him because she couldn't live on the reservation anymore, couldn't stand being Navajo in a world that wanted her to be invisible." Tom's singing faltered for just a moment before he caught himself, voice strengthening with visible effort. "These are the things I collect," the skinwalker said. It was at the pollen circle now, standing just outside the barrier, Lauren's face cycling through expressions, grief, joy, fear, desire, like someone flipping through photographs. Not trophies, memories, proof that they existed, that their lives mattered. When I consume them, they don't disappear. Daniel, they become part of something larger. They become eternal. "You're rationalizing murder," Daniel said. "You're a monster trying to pretend there's meaning in what you do." The creature's face went blank, then it smiled with too many teeth. "Yes," it said, and now its voice was different, younger, male, uncertain. "Yes, I suppose I am. Do you want to know what I remember about being human, Ranger Warren? I remember being hungry, so hungry, not for food, but for more life, more time, more everything. I performed the forbidden rituals because I was dying, cancer, stage 4, 6 months, to live, and I thought, if I could, just have a little more time." Harrison's singing grew louder, more insistent. The other voices joined in crescendo, harmonizing in ways that made the air shimmer. The creature flinched, Lauren's face contorting. "They told me, the old stories, that if I violated the taboos, killed someone I loved, wore their skin, I could take their life, their time. So I did. I killed my brother. I wore him, and it worked. The cancer disappeared, but so did I so did. Everything. That made me human. Now I'm just hunger. For more. Faces, more memories, more proof that I still exist. The voice was cracking now, harmonics bleeding through. Lauren's alto, Thomas Ashke's tenor, others Daniel didn't recognize, all speaking simultaneously in imperfect synchronization. My name was Robert Bennerly. I was 37 years old. I had a wife, 2 children. I taught mathematics at Chinley High School. I liked hiking and photography and green chili stew. I was someone once. Harrison stopped singing. In the sudden silence he spoke. Robert Benally, you violated Ya'at-e. You took your brother's life. You became the thing our ancestors feared most. But you still remember your name. You still remember who you were. That means you can still choose to end this. Step into the barrier. Let the blessing destroy what you've become. Give your victims peace. The creature, Robert Benally, stood at the edge of the pollen circle. Its body rippled, faces emerging and disappearing across its torso. The brother it had killed first, Lauren, Thomas, others. Each face opened its mouth in a silent scream. Each face was a life stolen, a memory trapped, a person who would never go home. If I step into the circle, Robert said, I die. For real. Forever. Yes, Harrison confirmed. And the people I consumed, do they go free? We don't know, Harrison said honestly. Maybe they're already free, and only your guilt keeps their faces. Maybe they're trapped and will be released. Maybe death is just death and there's nothing after. But Robert, right now, you're choosing to keep killing, keep consuming, keep becoming more of a monster. That's the only certainty. If you continue, more people die. Daniel watched the creature's, Robert's face cycle through emotions. Fear, grief, rage, resignation. He thought about Lauren's daughter in Portland, who would never get the chance to reconcile with her mother. About Thomas Ashke's family, who'd spent 6 months hoping he'd come home. About the mathematics teacher, who'd loved green chili stew and hiking, and had made the worst choice a human could make, and then kept making it over and over, until he forgot he'd ever been human at all. I don't want to die, Robert whispered. And for a moment it was just a man's voice, single and afraid. I don't want to stop existing, even like this, even as a monster. Existence is better than nothing, isn't it? No one answered. The question hung in the desert air as the stars emerged overhead, thousands of them, indifferent and ancient. Robert stepped back from the circle. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry to all of them, to my brother, to Lauren, to Thomas, to everyone. But I can't. I'm too afraid, I'm too hungry for more. He turned and ran, body flowing into a 4-legged configuration that carried him across the sandstone with impossible speed. Tom raised his arm to throw another pollen pouch, but Harrison stopped him. Let him go. He'll kill again, Tom protested. Yes, Harrison said, but not tonight. Tonight we reminded him of who he was, planted doubt, made him question. That's the first step. Sometimes that's all we can do. Daniel slumped to the ground, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. The ceremony was over. Lauren Daniels was still dead. The skinwalker was still out there, and tomorrow he'd have to write a report that would make him sound insane, documenting events that defied every principle of rational investigation he'd ever learned. You did well, Harrison said, beginning to carefully sweep up the sand painting. Faced your fear, stood your ground. I didn't do anything, Daniel said. It walked away. Lauren's still dead. Her face is still trapped in that thing. You acknowledged the truth, Tom said quietly. You, Daniel Warren, who spent 15 years telling people that our stories are metaphors. You stood in a ceremony, watched a skinwalker confess its crimes, and you didn't try to rationalize it away. You didn't insist there had to be a scientific explanation. You saw the truth, and you accepted it. That's not nothing. Daniel thought about that as they packed up the ceremonial materials. About his presentation to the tourists that morning. Had it really only been 24 hours ago? Explaining that skinwalkers were cautionary tales. About his certainty that legends were just primitive people's attempts to explain natural phenomena. About his arrogance. "I was wrong," he said. "Yes," Tom agreed. "You were, but now you know better. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge?" Daniel Warren continued working at Canyon de Chelly. He stopped giving presentations about how the Navajo legends were metaphors. When tourists asked about skinwalkers, he told them the truth. "I don't know much about them. Talk to the Tribal Cultural Center. Listen to the stories from the people who've kept those stories alive for centuries. Don't dismiss what you don't understand." He filed his report about Lauren's disappearance, listing her as lost to hostile wildlife, body not recovered. The Park Service accepted it. Lauren's daughter in Portland eventually stopped calling, asking for updates that Daniel couldn't give. Thomas Ashkey remained on the missing persons list. The hiker from Texas was never found. Robert Benally, the man who'd become a skinwalker, was spotted twice more in the following months. Once, wearing a tourist's face, he tried to lure a child away from a tour group. Tom and 2 other Navajo rangers drove him off with pollen and prayers. Another time, he appeared to a couple camping illegally in the restricted zones, wearing Daniel's face, and told them to leave the canyon and never return. They did. The tribal council continued their ceremonies. Harrison Yazzie performed 4 more sings, trying to reach Robert, trying to remind him of his humanity. Each time, Robert got closer to the pollen circle. Each time, he turned away at the last moment, too afraid to choose death over existence. On the anniversary of Lauren's death, Daniel returned to Spider Rock. He placed a small memorial, her ranger badge, which had been found in the canyon, and a photograph of her daughter that the woman in Portland had sent, hoping it might provide closure, at the overlook. As he knelt there, watching the sun set over the red cliffs, he felt it, the sensation of being watched. He turned slowly. Robert Benally stood 50 feet away, wearing his original face, or something like it, aged by months of living as a monster. The face was haggard, stretched, barely human, but it was singular, not the shifting collection of stolen features. "I remember you," Robert said, his voice almost normal. "From the ceremony, you asked me to choose death." "I asked you to end the killing," Daniel corrected. "Death was just the method." "Same thing." Then Robert moved closer, and Daniel noticed he was walking on 2 legs, human posture, human gait. "Do you know what it's like? Wearing other people's faces? You start to forget which thoughts are yours and which thoughts you stole. Which memories really happened to you and which ones you just absorbed. I don't know if I actually like green chili stew, or if that's my brother's preference. I can't remember if my wife's name is Sarah, or if that's what Lauren's daughter was called." "Your wife's name is Maria," Daniel said quietly. "She still lives in Chinle. She's been waiting for you to come home. Not the monster. You." Robert's face twisted. "There is no me anymore. There's just this collection of stolen people wearing a name that used to mean something, but I wanted you to know I haven't killed anyone in 3 months. I'm trying. Every day I'm trying not to take another face. Some days I succeed." He turned to leave, but Daniel called out, "Robert, the offer's still open. The ceremony, whenever you're ready to choose." Robert paused at the canyon's edge, silhouetted against the dying light. "I know," he said, "but I'm not brave enough yet. Maybe someday. Maybe when I can't remember my name anymore, when there's nothing left of Robert Benally but hunger. Maybe then I'll find the courage to step into the circle." He fell backward off the cliff, body twisting in mid-air, reforming into something with wings that wasn't quite a bird and wasn't quite a bat. Daniel watched him disappear into the shadows of the canyon, carrying Lauren's face and Thomas's face and his brother's face and dozens of others into the darkness. The sun set, the stars emerged, and Daniel Warren drove back to the ranger station, where he would write another report that explained nothing, documented everything, and filed the truth away where no tourist would ever read it. The skinwalker was still out there. Maybe it would find the courage to die, maybe it wouldn't. But Daniel had learned something that all the education and rational thinking in the world couldn't teach. Some stories aren't metaphors, some warnings are literal, and some monsters are just people who made the worst possible choice and then couldn't unmake it, no matter how much they wanted to. He thought about Lauren often, about her daughter who would never know what really happened, about the memorial at Spider Rock that would weather and fade, forgotten by everyone except the rangers who knew the truth, about Robert Benally, slowly losing himself in the collection of stolen lives, trying every day to be brave enough to stop. And Daniel thought about belief, real belief, not the polite anthropological interest he'd once passed off as respect. He thought about the Hatta Ali who'd sung for hours to reach a monster, about Tom Begay, who'd patiently tolerated Daniel's skepticism and never said, "I told you so," about the Navajo people who'd kept these stories alive for centuries, not as entertainment, but as warning. "I believe you now," Daniel whispered to the empty desert night. "I believe every word." Somewhere in the canyon, something howled. It might have been a coyote. It might have been something wearing a coyote's voice, trying to remember what it meant to be wild and free and simple. Daniel didn't go to investigate. Some things he'd learned were better left in the darkness where they belonged. He drove home. He locked his doors. He slept with the lights on. And when he woke the next morning to give another tour, he told the tourists the truth. The legends are real. The warnings are real. Respect what you don't understand, and never ever assume that human beings can't become monsters if they're afraid enough of dying. Most of them thought he was joking. A few didn't. Those few nodded, understanding in their eyes, and stayed close to the group for the rest of the tour. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.